mesh that is working on. Another thing a user wanted to do was sort of, I know in Canada we have CTV has a really cool logo with these all these things that kind of flap around, cloth that flaps around in the wind and stuff, and he wanted to find an easy way of controlling it, so I came up with this rig. So all this going on here, I've got like simple planar cloth object and then a motion path, and then we use the to get the initial object to follow the motion path. Go to animation here. I'll show you under motion path, you use a flow path object, right? And you can have it flow nicely along that, and then you make that cloth, and then use input attract. And with the input attract, if we go in, and I'll go into painted here. So under paint, here we can paint input attract. So if I run this, see we can. You notice how it's got more attract at the leading edge because I wanted the rest to be more free. It's still not totally black here, so it's still somewhat attracted. And my input attract isn't very much. If I increase the input attract, it would just exactly follow it. So I could actually paint values. So if I wanted more, we could, let's see. That's a good value. Let me go back to the beginning here. There. So if I painted all this, it would follow a little too closely. The input attract isn't all the way up, but it'll you see it'll follow quite a bit. And if I can get that on there, I can even snap the last bit there to want to follow if I can get that brush on there. There, so you see you can kind of pull it in even while it's playing back. Sometimes that's useful when you're running a simulation. You can try painting values while it's running and just to free things up and see how that affects the simulation the way you like. If I were to, let's say I'd use a value 0 and I just do a flood fill, then if there's no input attract, the thing will just move away. So that's a useful way. Without constraints, you can kind of dial up the exact amount of constraint you want per vertex and stuff on it for doing a simulation. Okay. So another thing a user wanted to do was to glue sticky gooey stuff when you glue paper. So this simulation, you pull back and it peels gunk off, right? And it just pulls apart like that. Now if we let's just run this a little bit and go up, and I'll show you how I did this now. This is again using the stickiness attribute with cloth. I've just got a piece of cloth, a constraint. I'm pulling on one vertex there. And then here, this looks a little more complicated than it actually is if I'll take off the smoothing. So it's actually without smoothing, you can see it's simpler. And then also, originally it was just flat poly strips that I then extruded after running the cloth. So downstream of the cloth, I extruded it. That way you don't have to run the cloth on the whole little rectangular thing. So I just have these strips and make them sticky, and that was pretty much it. Just put them down, gave them some stickiness, and ran the simulation. It was nice and easy to set up. Now, another variant on that is you can use a breakable simulation. So in this one, it's more or less the same, but I added a terrible constraint on them to allow the pieces to break and snap, rather than have to either fully come off or not. Something else that's happening is the pieces are stretching quite a bit and they retain the stretched length. So that is we have a restitution tension that lets you stretch out things like taffy, and then it will keep the stretch state after you have stretched it, right? Instead of, if the normal stretchiness, even if you make it low, it always tries to go back to the original shape. So this allows you to change that rest length. Here's a slightly different simulation here, just doing it with tubes instead, like you put down dots of glue. Now that's quite a bit of stuff, but you notice how the length of these bits, right? They start out short. So I've got in here there are these little squat cylinders. But at the end, they become lengthened because of this restitution tension, allowing the rest length to change as the simulation progresses. And then in these cases, I just put a simple breakable constraint in the center of these tubes that this was based on. Here's another little variant of that. This one I just made the tension a little greater so they had to snap soon. And you see you also get the nice thinning in the middle as it pulls. So you could, I could show you the constraints here. So if I show the dynamic constraints, and then, if I went in, I could adjust the glue strength on the constraint to show you. So just made a breakable constraint. Where's the glue strength here? And there it goes, glue strength. So it's only 0.2. So if I make that strength like higher, like 0.5 or something, it'll probably have a tougher time breaking now when I run. It'll go up and it'll stretch out quite a bit before it finally gives, if at all. There you go. Okay, and you see it kept that longer length, and it's solving for those longer lengths. Okay. Oops, sorry. So here's another one, just doing lots of those in a grid. So again, this is actually quite simple. I just, if we go back to the beginning, I'll run it, and I've got smoothing on this. So if I turn off the smoothing, you can kind of see it's just pretty much a regular grid. I just took a mesh, separate detached component, and just scaled them down a little bit and extruded it. And then that was my object to glue, and then just constrain the bits. And then at the end, you just do a little smoothing on it to get the nicer shapes. This was sort of an attempt to do some sparks. In this, I'm emitting particles from each of these objects, and then the particles are attracted. You can make particles attracted to other particle systems, right? So there's this force of attraction. So it's all done without expressions. The particles attract, and then the particles also emit particles. So you've got these two particles moving towards each other. When they hit each other, they annihilate, and then they emit like a trail of particles behind them, and then there's just a little turbulence. I suppose if you want to get fancy with this kind of thing, you could actually have a fluid here, and you could emit heat into the fluid, and then the way a typical arc moves upward, you've got the air being heated around the arcing sparks, and the updraft from the heated air will move the spark up so it'll form like an arc instead of just going straight across, right? Now, another way of doing sparks so it's easier is with PaintFX. And actually, a guy who worked on PaintFX is here. I see. There's Andrew Pierce in the corner. So it's an oldie, but it's still useful for a lot of effects. So here, I wanted to do one of these glow balls. The what do you call them? The plasma balls, and I've got just some branching PaintFX here with some kind of glow on it. You can't quite see the rendering effect. And then this object comes in here is a fairly recent addition to PaintFX, which is the line modifiers. And they're very useful for controlling the shape and behavior of the PaintFX. In this case, I wanted the sparks to be attracted to this object. So I could take this and move it around. You can see one of the nice things about this as opposed to a particle simulation is that there's no dynamics. So you don't have to bake anything, or you can just immediately scrub to a frame, and as you play with sliders, you immediately see the shape of what the sparks are going to be. You don't have to run a simulation. So it's nice and fast, and the rendering's not too bad either, because it can be kind of hard to render these soft, fuzzy, glowy effects, right? Yeah, and then just animated a couple of the noise parameters to get the sparks to jump around a little bit. They used a little turbulence on it too. It can work fine. So there's actually this is on my blog. Some of the things I'm showing here they're either on my blog already, or they will be. Hopefully not too long from now. I want to try and get a lot of these examples up I'm showing. Here's That's on the area. So Duncan's Corner on the area. Here's another little example. Somebody wanted to do a scroll, and actually the bend deformers in Maya could be a little better, and it's not really easy to do something like a scrolling object with them. So, but you can do it pretty easily with PaintFX. So this is just a little PaintFX object, and then you could take this. You could use it as a wrap deformer on whatever you wanted, or so there are a lot of possible ways. You know, if you convert it to poly. In this particular case, I was using one of the bend attributes. So if I bring up the attribute editor here and go to the scroll, under tubes, behavior, and then bend. So I've got a little, I'll just break the connection to the keyframe there. So there's just this little bend bias, which was useful for doing the scrolling. And then also there's the bend, you know, you can flip it around, and you can do twist and a lot of other things on top of that, you know, to get fancier, but this is a useful little trick for that. This is another thing I did with PaintFX. I just wanted to do like a, you know, something sort of like a towel, and I just did a auto paint of PaintFX with little. You can have like a PaintFX where it's like a little single poly element, right? And just have these all over it. These randomly, you can kind of control the orientation and randomness of the planes nicely. So I found PaintFX was quite useful for that, and it tracks the surface. And then just put a texture map. I think it was a ramp on it, sort of a half circle, so it looked like the kind of hooked cloth element on each of the things to render. Now this, I think, is pretty nice. I don't normally show other users' work at my talks, but I was quite blown away by this work by Alessandro Prodin. He did some renderings of the Farnsworth House, and you might not really. Most of the people seeing these images for the first time think that the leaves and stuff are just a photograph, and then he's comped his house into it, or maybe, you know, the foreground tree elements, computer graphics, but everything in the background. Everything, all the grass in this is completely done with PaintFX to poly, and he also rendered it all in one pass. Had almost 1 billion triangles in the render. He used a final gather to get good global, and I think global illumination is really a key to getting good vegetation renders. And of course, careful texture mapping and stuff. He didn't just use the out-of-the-box textures from converting to poly, obviously. He went quite a bit more advanced on it. So I'll show you some of the images that he's got here. So you can see these are, I mean, if you look at the grass here, he's got all the clover and the mixture of different greens and elements just perfectly, and the way the light scatters through the trees and all the bleeding light effects in the trees. Again, it's a lot of people refuse to believe that these were real until they saw the wires, or that they weren't, you know, that they were not real. Let's look at another one here. Yeah, just some really nice uses of light. I've not seen balance of shading this good in vegetation before. One of the ways that he was able to accomplish all those polys was he used a lot of instancing and mental ray proxy objects to get the job done. See under the house, and you see the nice effects of the global illumination under there. Yeah. Very beautiful. And here's a shot just down amongst the grass, and you can see he's got the literally every blade of grass as a poly. So and there's without the leaves on the trees. And there were some tricks he used along the way to get it. I don't have the actual wires. They're no longer on the server. It would have been nice to show you, so I'll have those little thumbnails for the wires, which are kind of pointless. Okay, let me just go back here. So a technique that, one thing that he found was kind of blocking him on creating this was the lack of the ability to orient the leaves, towards the sun and straight up. They tend to come off based on branch angle and stuff, which can be quite problematic. So here, I'll create like a little oak tree here. And if we go in, there's a trick you can use to do this right now. I hope to get something in future releases to actually manage this, but right now you need to kind of use a trick. So if I go to the brush node here, there's under the leaves, where I'll find it here, tubes, growth, leaves. Come on, there you go. All right, and then there's a leaf forward twist attribute. Now, if I turn on the leaf forward twist, what happens is the leaves all face the camera, and you'll note that tumbling is slow too, because it's got to rebuild the tree every time because you've changed the view, which is not what you want. But you can use this, because what happens is when you convert to poly, if leaf forward twist is on or anything that uses the camera, it creates a connection to the camera, to a special camera thing on the stroke node. And so we turn this off, and now when I convert to poly, it won't create that connection. So I'll go modify, convert, PaintFX to polygon. Okay. So now the leaves are just kind of, again, they're sort of randomly oriented. Now to get them to face up, I'll go back to the my stroke, and actually here's the oak white medium. So now I'll turn on leaf forward twist, and now it's orienting them, but it's not quite orienting them up, and I'll show you what it's doing. On the stroke node, under mesh output, there's this camera point. That's what the camera would have connected to. It's not connected right now. So it's just 0, 0, 0. So they're all facing the origin. So what I'll do is I'll move this up. I'll just make it 1,000 or something, so it's up high in the sky. And now they all face up. And if you want, you could create an object and just connect its translate to the camera point. You could move it around, and the leaves will track it as if you're tracking the sun. So it gives you a nice way of managing that. So it's a pretty simple, but people would not find it on their own, so you gotta have to tell you about it. So hopefully we'll fix that in future. Okay, next. Okay, now I thought might be fun. There's also some new features we put in a while back, which had one user wanted to create a pine tree, and the pine brush was not really doing what he wanted. So this brush will create pines with every needle as a poly. And I mean, the meshes are fairly dense, but I mean, they're, for the number of needles, they're actually not. These are all just quads with triangular quads for each needle, which is about as minimal as you can get. So, but it's still, few things will take up as much polys as a pine tree. But this lets you get more or less real ones. I did a render of this in Mental Ray, so let's see that. So there's the Mental Ray render, and so they come out pretty natural looking, I think. And you could add other elements to it, cones. I've got a brush with actual Christmas ornaments that are using the flowers and stuff. You can kind of make fake ornaments and stuff. So that's not available right now. I'm going to try and put that up on the area soon so that you can go to my blog and hopefully download that. I still have preview running here. Let me just quit that. Okay. So here's the brush, and you can just paint a tree, and then go into the attribute editor here, and I'll just show you the thing that allows this to shape this a little better is we added there's a few releases back under the tubes, under the twigs here. We have branch after twigs, and that allows you to have the twigs come off the base trunk of the pine, and then you get the splitting branches on each of the branch. Otherwise, you get, if I turn that off, you get something, it's a different kind of shape, which is is not really what you'd be after with a pine. And the other thing that comes with that is the twig length scale. So that you can really shape and profile your tree. So I could make it skinny at the top, or I could, I could make it skinny at the bottom. Even like get rid of the lower branches and stuff. And it gives you a lot of control over the shape and density of your tree.